Hey my dudes, welcome back to my channel. My last long video in which I really focused on details was received very well. If you haven't watched it, make sure to check it out. That's why I decided to make this video in a similar way. But this time, we will be checking out player skills, or more importantly, acquirable player skills. I'll be ranking them in a tier list, so make sure to stay till the end to know which skills are the best to add to your players. As a disclaimer, I should explain to you what I mean by acquirable skills. What I mean by that is that all player skills that cannot be acquired using the skill tokens will not be included in this tier list. So for example, I will not be ranking skills such as blitz curler or for example momentum dribbling, but I could do a separate video in which I also rank those skills. The order I'll be going by is the one you can see in the game. If you want to add a skill to a player, you can see this list of skills which are called acquirable skills. Let's begin with scissors or scissor feint, which is a skill which generally speaking is not really that good of a skill in game. I barely see people using it, and even if they do it, it's usually on accident. And I actually believe that it's quite the opposite. It's a quite decent skill, which is also good because people don't really expect it. If you compare it to a similar skill, which is actually performed by pressing the skill in the same direction, the skill I'm talking about is flip flop. Scissors actually performs better in my opinion. Here you can actually see a clip from my shorts where you can see that scissors did actually a good job in tricking the opponent to then actually do a shot. And this is another thing I find really interesting about it, that after you do the skill, it's really nice to do a pass or a shot right after, because the player is really lined up for the shot after performing the scissors feint. Overall, it's not as effective as other skills that we will talk about later, but I would actually put it in the solid B tier. Now we move on to one of the most popular and probably most effective skills that we have in our game. It's of course double touch. I'm gonna be honest, the amount of people using this skill because of its simplicity and effectiveness may have made it worse. So nowadays I think it's way harder for a double touch skill to actually work in game, as opponents, especially in higher divisions or just better players, will always be expecting this skill. Something all of you probably know, or most of you know, there is a sort of a upgraded version of the double touch, which is called the special double touch, which can be performed if the player has double touch, flip flop, and soul control. This makes the player perform a completely different animation, which in most situations is better, but from my perspective, I feel like sometimes the special double touch takes a bit longer to perform than the normal double touch. Overall though, the special double touch is probably more effective when it comes to dribbling opponents than the default double touch. Here's also an interesting way how you could use the double touch. If you time the shot correctly, you could actually interrupt the double touch animation. So basically, the player begins doing the double touch animation, but it doesn't quite finish. This could make some shots more unpredictable or just faster in their execution, but overall it's just a fun gimmick that I found with this skill. My verdict for this skill: it's still highly effective, but it has become overused and kinda predictable nowadays. I still believe that you could give this skill to absolutely any player when it comes to middle field and attack, and maybe even your offensive fullbacks. A quick double touch could always open up a great opportunity for a pass or shot, which could lead up to a goal. This is why I will put it in A tier, in a very high A tier. I just think that there are some skills that might be more important, just because of how overused the skill has become. Also because I see a lot of players just brainlessly spamming the double touch, which just leads to losing the ball. Just passing the ball might have been way more effective. So solid A tier, not quite S tier for me though. From one of the best skills in our game, we go to a significantly worse one, which is flip flop. As I have previously mentioned when ranking the scissors feint, I believe that the scissors feint is just a straight upgrade from the flip-flop. It is performed by pressing the skill button in the same direction, but I just believe scissors to be more effective and generally more consistent. The only reason to ever add flip-flop to any of your players would be if you're looking to give them the special double touch. Because remember, flip-flop is one of the free skills that is required for the player to do and perform the special double touch. Other than that, I'm gonna be honest, it seems like it almost never works. Their movement is quick, but the defenders always know where the ball goes after this flip-flap, so it barely works, and when it does work, similar skills such as scissors or maybe even double touch would have worked the same way. As beautiful as this skill is in real life, in our game it is going to be in the underwhelming C tier. If a player is starting with this skill, it's better than nothing, but adding this skill to actually use it and not adding it to get the special double touch is probably not that good of an idea. If you've wondered before which skill or which dribbling skill I would put higher than double touch, here it is, it's the Marseille Turn. One of the reasons that lead me to believe that Marseille Turn is one of the best skills in the game is the fact that the Marseille Turn player skill doesn't unlock you a single dribbling skill. You could argue it unlocks you about 3 dribbling skills in game. If you compare it to double touch can only be performed if you press the skill button in the direction the player is looking. So its usability is very limited. While the Marseille Turn, it has different animations and uses depending on in which direction you use the skill. For example, you could use it as a 45-degree turn from the wing as a sort of way to cut inside and go for the shot. You can see me demonstrating how exactly you could use this to your favor in numerous shorts. Another option to actually use this Marseille Turn is of course doing the sort of 75-degree turn. Depending on which direction the player is facing, there's also a chance for you to perform the free touch roulette, which is basically just a slower and worse Marseille Turn. You probably want to avoid that because it is highly ineffective. It has only rarely worked for me. And if your player does not have the double touch skill, there is also a chance you could perform it forwards. Love me or hate me guys, I believe the high versatility and effectiveness of the Marseille Turn is why it is the first dribbling skill that deserves to go in S tier. Next up on the list is a less effective skill, it's the Sombrero. Now this skill can be incredibly fun to mess around with in practice. When it does work it looks really cool, but I believe it just has no competitive use. It requires a clear and really specific setup for it to actually work. And even if you do perform it in a real match, there's still a chance that after performing the Sombrero, the player will lose the ball because he doesn't have the best heading, jumping or height. More importantly, I believe that this skill can be quite annoying if you have added it to a player on accident or if you just have it by default. The reason for that is if you're looking to pass the ball quickly in a counterattack and you perform the Sombrero on accident, which makes you lose all of your momentum, slows you down and maybe even makes you lose the ball. So this skill at times can be more destructive than useful. As I said, I believe this skill has no competitive use, so the only reason I would ever use it if you want to have fun skilling and dribbling. And when it does work, it's really fun, so I will put it in C tier just for this fun factor of this skill. Let's move on to another skill I would consider more disruptive than actually useful. It's the Chop Turn. The Chop Turn in-game is a pretty fast skill, but it ultimately does not go very far and the defender is oftentimes still able to get the ball. If you compare it to other dribbling skills in our game, it's one of the less effective ones. More importantly, Marseille Turn, which is performed in the exact same way, has not only more variations, but is also more effective in almost all of them. It could oftentimes happen that one of those skills overrides the other. So basically you want to perform a Marseille Turn, but the player instead goes for a chop turn. I almost think that this is a way of Konami nerfing players with Marseille Turn, because sometimes they release players with both chop turn and Marseille Turn, which ultimately makes them worse. I believe there is absolutely no reason to add this skill to a player. The only time I have really seen it perform decently is on Neymar's recent card, the MSN card, who actually has a chop turn. When using that card, that skill actually kind of worked for me. Other than that, I believe Master Turn still outclasses it. To some of you, this decision might seem a bit harsh. I believe chop turn, because it's being outclassed by, for example, Marseille Turn, has absolutely no place in our game. This is why I will put it in D tier. If you do add it, it can be disruptive, and it's even more annoying when a player already has it in their skills and you cannot remove it. Here comes a skill that a lot of people underestimate. Cut behind a turn not only adds the dribbling skill to the player, but it also gives the player the option to perform a Cruyff turn, which is basically a more controlled version of the fake shot that goes behind the player. Generally speaking, I believe that fake shots are something that a lot of people sleep on in eFootball. A quick fake shot in front of the box can be really effective. If you rely a lot on dribbling and skilling, your strikers and maybe even your wingers must have this skill. This might surprise some people, but I think that cut behind a turn brings the fake shots to another level. They are quite unpredictable and they even look really nice. It's really smooth when you're able to perform a fake shot, a Cruyff turn, then immediately score a crazy long shot. I believe just the ability for doing those crazy fake shots justifies cut behind a turn being in A tier, close to S tier. Let's move on to another skill that is unfortunately really outclassed by double touch. It's the Scotch Move. If your player has both double touch and Scotch Move, the player will only perform one of those. So honestly, I don't see any reason in adding this skill to a player. I've used it a few times, and maybe if a player really starts with this skill and you're not able to give him additional skills, this might be at least a half decent option. So I'll put it in C tier, just above D tier. But there is really no point in adding this skill to a player if you have the option to give them double touch. Soul control, on the other hand, is useful in multiple ways. On the one side, it, remember, gives you the option to perform the special double touch if combined with flip flop and double touch. But also, this allows for more swift turns and is generally really important if you're looking to skill and, move around with the ball using a player to dribble. Combined with a high balance stat, having soul control could allow you to do some really cool skills and moves that would allow you to open up for a shooting position. Highly useful skill and one that is underrated. Once again, it is both useful to combine with double touch and flip flop, and it's really useful on its own. Here comes a skill that is arguably more important than the stats of the player. It's heading. Now, probably most of you have used some cards of Haaland, which don't even have that high heading in stats. But ultimately he still does score a lot of headers because of his height and because of his skills. Usually those cards have the combination of heading and aerial superiority. And let me tell you, as long as your player has those two skills, even if he has bad heading, but he does have good height or jumping, he will still be able to score headers or defend using headers. This skill improves the heading accuracy by quite a lot, and is really useful when combined with aerial superiority. What that means is, almost every player in defense and offense could use this skill. It's less important when it comes to the middle field, maybe only your DMF should have this skill, but even then it's not really necessary. Arguably, you could even give this skill to defensive fullbacks for them to win headers when the opponent is crossing or doing chipped through balls to the wing. An amazing skill that is useful both defensively and offensively. For me, it's just shy of S tier. I will put it in A tier. And when combined with aerial superiority, it's definitely an S tier for me. The next player skill can be a quite consistent way of scoring goals. It's the long range curler skill. I believe that a player that has 85 or more curl and this skill can be a really decent way of scoring goals. The same way as, for example, heading, this skill really improves the accuracy of those shots. So even if a player does not have the best finishing, I'd say about 80 is almost enough. You're still able to really score long range curler goals, as long as you of course have also decent curl. I do feel like long range curler shots and generally finesse shots have decreased in their effectiveness over the last few updates. So I think although this is still a decent way of scoring, there are definitely better ways. So this skill is probably a must-have on wingers, but optional on strikers or, for example, AMFs. For that reason, I will put it in the decent B tier. It might seem a bit incorrect because next to scissor feint it does look a bit weird, I'm gonna be honest. But I do think that it has a really limited usability. The only player that really needs it are wingers. All other players could probably be fine without it. Chip shots and chip shot control as a player skill are something that I never really found a use for. I'm gonna be honest, when the goalkeeper rushes you, it's probably better to either use a skill, just run past the goalkeeper, or just curl around the goalkeeper. All of these options are way better than using a chip shot, which on the one hand can be really inaccurate. It can oftentimes not even go over the goalkeeper will still save it. Or you will just take too long time, or maybe you even shoot over the goal. I have never really seen a decent enough improvement that is added to the chip shot by adding this player skill. Quite recently though, I have kinda used a bit more of chip shots. It's kinda fun, but I'm gonna be honest guys, it's more of a gimmick than an actual shot that should be in the game. It goes right into D tier. This is not a good shot, and there are way better options to score. Here comes one of my most favorite player skills in this game. It's the Knuckle Shot. It might be not as consistent as other shots I'll talk about later, but I believe that using the Knuckle Shot can actually create other goal scoring opportunities, because oftentimes the goalkeeper is not able to directly save the ball from a Knuckle Shot, and he will parry it, which would allow you to do a follow-up shot and then score. The Knuckle Shot skill can be used in two ways. On the one hand, you could use it as an in-game shot by performing it as a stunning shot with about more than 50% of the power, or you could use the Knuckle Shot from a free kick. In my opinion, the second option is the better one. In game, I couldn't really find a consistent use for the Knuckle Shot, but from free kicks, I was able to score some once in a while, or maybe just get lucky and make the goalkeeper parry the ball and score afterwards. Even if it's a rare occasion to actually score from a knuckleball free kick, I think it's still worth it. Just for me, this is probably one of the most exciting things that could happen to me in eFootball. I really like scoring those banger knuckleball free kicks that the opponent does not expect. Maybe it's personal bias, but I think Knuckle Shots deserves to be in the B tier just because of how fun it is, and at the same time it does have some practical use. You might actually score a goal once in a while that otherwise you wouldn't have expected to score from a free kick that is located way too far away for you to actually score from it in any other way. Let's move on to what I believe is the GOAT of all of the long-range shooting skills in eFootball. It's the dipping shot. Some of you might argue it's actually the rising shot, but I'll talk about that later when we come to the rising shot, which is up next. I believe that the dipping shot is really effective when you're close to the box, right outside it, or maybe even a bit further away. It sort of does have that knuckle shot aspect to it if you're far away. It bounces around a lot. The goalkeeper almost never can really catch it. He will parry it, and this could actually give you a goal. From up close, my players have been really clinical using the dipping shot. Almost like 50% of my goals have been solo runs made by players such as Kaká or maybe even Bojan Kirkic that go for a dipping shot and score it. It's really easy to perform and it's hard to mess up. For example, if you go for a rising shot, you have to be really careful when you pick the power of the shot. For its simple effectiveness and also just the looks and fun that come with it, I'm gonna put dipping shot in S tier. I think this is the best option or the best shot you could use if you want to finish an attack when you're further away from the box. Let's talk about the rising shot now. I believe this used to be the go-to shot if you would want to concentrate on shooting long shots as your game plan. But I do feel like in the last couple of updates and generally in this period of time, the rising shot has decreased in accuracy. Other people have also noticed that on like forums, and I believe that there is now better options to use. For example, the dipping shot, which might be not that good at longer ranges, but I'll remind you that a rising shot is also not really usable at longer ranges, like if you're really far away from the box, because it will most likely go over the goal. Now that's kind of the problem with rising shot. You either have to be really close to the box or just a bit far from it. If you're really far away, the rising shot could oftentimes just go up too high and just go over the goal. So what that means, the rising shot does kind of have this really limited usability. If you're close to the box, you're really able to finish consistently with it. Although I must say, myself, I've been getting kind of unlucky with this shot. I keep hitting the crossbar or just missing the goal. But when it does work, it looks really, really beautiful. So overall, I think it's still a really consistent option to use in that really slim window of finishing, you know, just in front of the box, a bit behind the box. It's still really, really good. So I'll put it in A tier. To round it up with the shooting skills, let's now look at long range shooting. And this is an absolutely top tier skill, which you could use in almost all players from middle field to attack. Long shots are still a very effective method either to scoring or just creating an opportunity to score after the goalkeeper parries. The good thing about long range shooting is that once again it has multiple uses. On the one hand, if a player only has long range shooting, it's still enough when combined with, for example, a high kicking power stat. So just by itself, without even having any shooting skills, just having long range shooting is already enough for really good long shots. But when you combine it with other player skills like, for example, dipping shot or rising shot or even knuckle shot, it becomes times better, as it also enhances the accuracy and effectiveness of those shots. This is an absolute crazy S tier player skill, which you could use on, once again, as I said, almost all players in your team. maybe even your fullbacks, honestly. The only players I would not add it to is of course your goalkeeper and your center backs. Although the next skill, Acrobatic Finishing, sounds really fun, it's really circumstantial. I've almost never seen a player score a goal with a bicycle kick or a scissors kick. It has only happened once to me. I remember I was playing against my friend and then he just suddenly scores a scorpion kick from across. Now once in a full moon, this might be really crazy, you might be really happy that it happened, but guys, we have really no control over when our player really go for those acrobatic finishes. It's really just luck. And once again, this is a skill that could actually mess you up, because you're going for a header, but instead your player suddenly decides to go for a bicycle kick. There can be no competitive use of a skill that we have no control over. It's the same way as if double touch would be a skill that the player would perform completely randomly. We couldn't control well when the player does the skill. Double touch or any other skill would have never been that high in the tier if we had no control over them. For that reason, I just have to put acrobatic finishing in the D tier. Heel trick, on the other hand, is a really nice skill you could add either to your strikers or just your attacking players for better passing. Although having the player skill also allows the players to shoot using their heel, I would say just the passing part is the good part of this player skill. Passing with the heel could not only allow players to do better in passing from unorthodox positions, but also throw your opponent off, give a pass from a position he doesn't expect you to give a pass from. What also comes with the heel trick is the fact that it looks very nice, it looks very effective. The small downside there is, when the player shoots or passes with the heel trick, the ball oftentimes goes in a very slow way. So sometimes when you don't mean to, you could actually go for the heel trick on accident, pass with the heel on accident, which really makes the ball go slow, and this might cost you your possession. You might lose the ball because of that. For that reason, I'll have to put it in B tier. It's a quite decent skill that I would maybe add to your strikers, but it's definitely not a must-have. Moving on to the next skill, I'm really unsure about my decision. On the one hand, when you go for first-time shots, it oftentimes does happen to me that players without this skill are less likely to go for the first-time shot. They tend to take another touch, which makes me lose the ball. And of course, this skill also greatly improves the accuracy of those first-time shots. So in that slim window, I'd say first-time shots are pretty important. But then I actually looked back at my recent goals and I asked myself, how many of those goals were actually first-time shots? I found almost none. So for that reason, I feel like that maybe it's just my playstyle, but I tend to control the ball more and go less for actual first-time shots. So for that reason, although if you decide to go for first-time shots, I think it's an important skill and you probably should have it at least on your striker, but overall I think the importance of first-time shots in eFootball is probably not as high as some people might think. For that reason, I'm gonna put first-time shot in the B tier. Some of you might really not agree with this decision, as if you look really at the skills that I put in B tier and which ones I put in A tier, you might say, man, this skill fits more into A tier than it does into B tier. But there's another thing about the first-time shot. A lot of players with decent finishing are able to score first-time shots without having this skill. So even if you do decide to go for first-time shots, you're still able to score without this skill. The next skill has a very similar effect. The one-touch pass is basically the same thing as the first-time shot, but for passing. And if we go back to what I said, I ranked the first time shot probably lower than expected because of the fact that first time shots do not happen as often as I would like them to happen. In this case of the one-touch pass, I think it's the complete opposite. One-touch passes happen all of the time in eFootball. Most people do tend to play in a sort of tiki-taka playstyle, fast-paced passing, to go into counterattacks. That's exactly why one-touch passing is a really important skill to have on probably most of your midfielders and even on your striker, as passing from your striker to wingers or other players making a run on the wing is always really important. And what I found myself is that even if your striker does not have the best passing, for example, my Suarez has only like 66 low passing or something like that, so definitely not high. After adding him the one-touch pass, his passing improved really greatly. So outside of enhancing already great passing of, for example, midfielders, you could also improve passing of players that don't even have that good passing. Adding one-touch pass allows them to improve their accuracy from one-touch passes, which really helps in counterattacks. On this one, I think there definitely won't be people disagreeing. I'm gonna put it in the S tier, as I believe this skill is probably good on all of the players on the pitch. You could add this skill to almost all players in defense, in the midfield, in the attack, and it won't hurt. It most definitely won't hurt, because maybe even in defense it does sometimes happen to me that I'm doing some quick passes, I don't pay attention, I'm getting pressured by the opponent, and a fast one-touch pass goes in an inaccurate way, which leads to me losing the ball. So who knows, maybe even having the one-touch pass on your CBs is actually the way to play this game. There's another highly obvious pick coming up for me. Through passing, in my opinion, is also one of the best skills in the game. I don't even have to showcase it to you. Most of the clips I showed you this video have already featured players using this skill, because guys, in our game it's almost impossible to start an attack without using the through pass. If you don't use the through pass, you probably make some sort of run dribbling. But still guys, through passes are part of almost all attacks in the game. I don't even have to argue with you about it. Having this skill on most players, such as your striker, your midfielder, even your fullbacks, your wingers, is highly important. So it slides right into S tier, as it's an amazing skill. Let's move on to another pass related skill. Pinpoint crossing has also this factor I have previously mentioned with, for example, heading. Even if a player doesn't have the highest lofted passing stat, giving him the skill still greatly improves his lofted passing and crossing. The same way as I've previously mentioned, heading, giving the player skill heading to a player greatly improves his heading and allows him to score headers even if the player has only about 70 heading. The pinpoint crossing skill is definitely a must-have for wingers and maybe even fullbacks if you're going for the offensive fullback playstyle. Even if crossing is not your main game plan, I would still definitely give pinpoint crossing to wingers or players like AMFs which run to the wing. Even if you don't plan to cross that often, having it as a backup plan can always be useful. This player skill is mind-blowingly good. I just have to put it up there in S tier, as I believe it really opens up a whole new playstyle and it really improves the weaknesses of players, such as having low lofted passing still allows the player to cross with ease. Up next is a skill that is both useful for passing and shooting. The outside curler allows players with bad weak foots to pass and shoot using their strong foot but curl it the other way. So it's basically a substitute for their weak foot. This skill is incredibly useful to help with a weak foot. I would definitely add it to strikers and wingers which don't have a high weak foot. This would allow them to use a finesse shot and shoot it using the outside of their foot. Not only do those shots look very cool, they are also pretty effective. You should definitely remember that also this skill is pretty useful for passing. The player can cross and pass on the ground using the outside of their foot as well. Those passes are also very good. Usually if you have a player with high passing, they will go for those curled passes more often. This is when you end up seeing those outside of the foot curling passes. For example, a player I use this skill on a lot for passing is Bernardo Silva. His weak foot is medium, if I remember correctly, and because of that, having the outside curler skill helps him a lot when passing with his left foot, as he would pass with his right foot. I believe that this skill also goes in the S tier. Maybe I'm glazing this skill too hard, but I really think it has no downsides. Just think about it. If you compare it with, for example, heel trick, which has a similar functionality, heel trick can be annoying at times. It can sabotage you. You know, you can do it on accident. The ball will go slow, you will lose the ball. This is never the case with the outside curler skill. When has ever an outside curler shot happened, or an outside curler pass, which actually slowed you down, which made your gameplay worse? That's it. It never happens when it's bad. For the fact that it has no downsides and it greatly improves basically the weak foot accuracy of the players, I will put it in S tier. Now let's talk about a skill that is way worse. The Rabona might sound cool and interesting at first glance. Some of you might actually point out, hey, the concept of this player skill is actually similar to the outside curler. It also allows players to use their strong foot instead of their weak foot. That is correct, but in the case of the Rabona, I think it's way worse. You see, when you use the outside curler, you don't lose a noticeable amount of power of the shot or pass. Sometimes it's actually better than shooting or passing with your weak foot. In the case of the Rabona, I must say I've actually never seen a Rabona shot happen, but I do see Rabona passes or crosses happen once in a while. The problem with the Rabona crosses are they are way weaker, they don't have the curl of the normal pass, and they don't go as high. So if a player has both a weak foot, a low weak foot, and the skill from the get-go, I guess it's decent. It's not bad that he has it, but it's definitely not a substitute to having a weak foot, since the passes are weaker and sometimes even less accurate. For that reason, I'm gonna put it in the C tier. As I said, if a player has the skill from the get-go, it's fine. It could be fun, you know, the player might sometimes use the skill, you might be amazed, you might think it's cool, but adding the skill with the intention to improve the weak foot capabilities of a player isn't that good of an idea. If you take, for example, outside curler, it's a way better option if you want to improve the weak foot finishing or passing of the player. Let's move on to the weighted pass skill. The effect of this one is pretty similar to ones we talked about before. So for example, through passing. And in this case, I think it's not as important as through passing is. Having to add both through passing, one-touch passing, and maybe even weighted pass is a bit of overkill. When using players that have this skill, I've definitely noticed better passing, better through passing, but I just think it's not really a must-have. You could add it to middle fielders if you really want to, but I think that a great passing stat through passing and one-touch passing is almost more than you need. So although the effect of this skill is definitely noticeable and it's decent, I just think that spending 3 skills or maybe even more if you count in Pinpoint Crossing on just passing is probably a bit too much. Just think about it, adding 4 skills just to improve the player's passing is probably too much. You should probably focus the 2 other slots on something else. For that reason, I'm still putting weighted pass in the B tier. It still has a decent effect and you could definitely use it on middle fielders. If a player has the skill right away, you should actually be pretty happy. But I think spending skill tokens to get this skill and add it to almost all players is definitely not necessary. Let's look at yet another passing skill that you have no control over. The no-look pass also happens quite randomly in game. You can't really control when it happens. I have never really seen that much impact on the game from this skill, but I do see players like, for example, in my team Ronaldinho performing this no-look pass. Sometimes it's fun, you know, you play with friends and you do this pass on accident. It can be quite interesting, quite fun. I don't know how to tell how much of an impact it actually does on the game. The skill in game says passing with a no-look pass makes the opponent more confused, you know, they don't know where the ball is going. I haven't really noticed that. But then, I'm gonna be honest guys, even if the impact of this skill is not that high, just think about it. There's way worse skills than this skill, because this skill does not have any negative impact. It's not like the no-look pass will be worse in accuracy. No, that does not happen. So only positive stuff can happen from having this player skill. For that reason, I'm actually thinking of putting it up in C tier instead of D tier. Because look, if you compare it with, for example, Chop Turn also, in my opinion, has like some negative drawbacks. It's not just that it's bad by itself, it can also be harmful for you. As for example, you want to go for a Marseille Turn, but instead the Chop Turn triggers. Or for example, you guys want to go for a header, but instead your player goes for a bicycle kick that goes way over, or he just loses the header because of that. The only skill that I have in D tier that also has no negative impact is chip shot control. But in the case of chip shot control, remember guys, chip shots, I would not use them generally, which means this skill will not be useful. But in the case of no-look pass can trigger when you just do a normal pass, whether it's a normal pass, whether it's a through ball, it can always trigger. So for that reason, because it actually triggers on something that you do more often, I would actually argue that you can put this skill in C tier. I would definitely not use any skill tokens to add it, but if a player has it right away, it can definitely only come with positive benefits. So there are no negative benefits, there are simply no downsides to this skill. Maybe the impact of it is not that high, but what it impacts is quite good. Because of the impact it causes on passing, if this would have been something else, like impacting chip shots, it would not be in C tier. But because it impacts something that is used more often, I think you can actually put this skill in the C tier. Here comes the last pass related skill, finally. It's the low lofted pass. My opinion about this skill is similar to the opinion or what I said about the weighted pass. It's another one of those skills for passing that I believe are overkill. You probably don't need them on most players. I believe the most important skills for passing are one-touch pass, through passing, and pinpoint crossing. The last one is already an optional for me, because not every player needs pinpoint crossing, not every player needs to be able to cross, run in the wing. Low lofted passes can be really useful for example, switch the wing. If you're using them on a fullback, you can perform like a low lofted pass to the other side, which can be really nice. It's sort of similar to the low punt of the goalkeeper, which is also useful in starting attacks. But once again, I think adding the skill to a player is probably unnecessary. It is really nice for a midfielder to have this skill, maybe even for a fullback. It's nice to switch flanks using this skill. But wasting skill tokens just to get this skill to a player is probably not worth it. You can add a lot of stuff instead that would be more useful to, for example, improve his weaker qualities. For that reason, this skill goes also in the B tier. You see, in my opinion, I believe that having through passing, one-touch passing, and a high passing and lofted passing stat is enough for most players on the field. You could argue that players that specialize in passing should maybe have those skills such as weighted pass or lofted pass to really maximize the effects of their passing. But I would argue, instead of really focusing on one attribute, how about you leave it the way it is and you give them something to improve their other qualities. Let's take a look at one of the most underrated skills in eFootball, and one probably most of you don't pay enough attention to. The long throw is an incredibly strong player skill that probably more of you should take advantage of. Giving long throw to your fullbacks can be always very useful, as they are the ones that end up taking the throws usually. By using those long throws, it's really easy to create attacks from scratch. You're able to actually cross from the throw-in into the box if you're close to it. By having long throw on one of your players, you're basically converting some of the throw-ins into actual corner kicks. This happened multiple times to me, that after a long throw the opponent does not expect an immediate attack. I end up crossing to my striker from this throw-in. He ends up heading it back to a player, which shoots, and I score. I will put the skill into the A tier. I just need you to remember, this is definitely not the main strategy you should rely on. You probably cannot just score only from long throws, definitely not. Goals scored from those type of attacks are going to be more rare. Instead, they can be a nice trick up your sleeve that you could suddenly use in a match to score an unexpected goal. Let's now take a look at another player skill that enhances set piece taking in a way. The last skill, long throw, in this case enhanced throw-ins, and penalty specialist kinda enhances penalties. Now, before saying anything about the skill itself, I must say the penalties are really bad in this game. Konami should definitely work on them, improve them. Currently, penalties are just a game of rock, paper, scissors. Nothing more than that. It takes no skill in taking penalties. It's just luck and about guessing or maybe reading your opponent's mind. The gameplay of this game can be really good at times. You can call it realistic. The free kicks are great, the shots are great. You can miss. It's not just a game where you constantly score. But in the case of penalties, you don't even have the option to miss. It is not possible to miss a penalty. Another issue is, if the goalkeeper guesses correctly, then it is almost 100% guaranteed that he saves it. That is also a downside, but here's where this skill actually comes into play. You see, if you're actually hitting the top corner of the goal, you're able to score even if the goalkeeper guessed the correct direction. When it comes to the penalty specialist skill, I will put it in the C tier. It's a shame that penalties are so bad and boring in our game. Even though they are quite boring and they're mostly random, I think you should or you could have at least one player with this skill to maybe give you a bit of an upper hand if you ever do get a penalty. But remember guys, if you just shoot in the opposite direction, you will still score. You cannot miss penalties. So even in that case, this player skill is not that important. If Konami improves penalties, which I doubt since penalties have stayed the same almost like since PES 2020, I will not change this ranking, as for me, the fact that the thing that this skill enhances is so boring that it weighs this skill down. So because of how bad penalties are in this game, how boring there are, I would also not put penalty specialist high. It is hard for me to judge the next skill on the line, gamesmanship. On the one hand, it definitely works. I've definitely seen players with gamesmanship, in particular Messi and Neymar, win a lot of more free kicks and penalties for me, but ultimately it depends on your playstyle, whether you want to dribble and win a lot of free kicks, because what I see a lot of players do nowadays, they don't really dribble for one player, they pass more. So for some of you this skill might be useless, as maybe you're not that great at free kicks, you don't want to win them, instead you want to score from in-game shots instead of set pieces. I personally really enjoy the dribbling and skilling aspect of our game, and I really enjoy free kicks that can be awarded from falls. For that reason, I do end up using some players with this skill, but I've never really tried to give this skill to a player. Usually, most of the players with great dribbling and skills will win you the free kicks by themselves. I don't think this skill is really needed, but if you want to go for a playstyle that is focused around free kicks, you could definitely justify giving this skill to a player. I'm gonna put it in the B tier. I believe that its effectiveness is visible. Players with this skill do kinda react more to the tackles of the players. Even if a player has great dribbling, I oftentimes do see a player get fault, but they keep staying up. They don't go down immediately. In some situations this can be good, as you can continue your attack. In some cases I'd say that is worse. Overall, this is probably a good skill to have on your wingers or midfielders that you like to dribble with. Let's now continue with some defensive skills. The first one, man marking, I usually use together with interception and blocker on almost all defensive players. I think the combination of those three skills, so man marking, interception and blocker, is an absolute must-have for all defensive players, especially if we are talking about CBs. Although outside of those skills there are still a lot of important qualities a CB must have, but still, whenever I use a CB that is missing at least one of those skills, I definitely notice that he is playing worse than he definitely could be playing. Man marking in particular is very important, as there are nowadays a lot of quick and fast strikers or wingers that will take any opportunity or given chance to sprint away from your defenders. So good marking is important at all times, especially if you're using slower CBs. Because this skill is a must on all CBs and maybe even fullbacks, especially if you're using defensive fullbacks. You could also argue that you could use this skill on DMFs, but I think a DMF could actually be still pretty good without man marking. For that reason, I'm definitely putting man marking into the S tier with no regrets. Let's follow through with crackback. This is also a defensive skill, or at least you can call it that, but this one I would definitely not use on CBs, but rather on your strikers or attacking players. Crackback allows for the players or your attackers to be more aggressive and go for intercepting the ball from the center backs and the defenders of your opponent. In my opinion, one of the most easiest ways to score is catch your opponent on his mistake instead of trying to create something on your own. It's really easy to make a mistake in this game, as there might be server delay, you might not really have full control over your players, you know. Sometimes the player doesn't really do a one-touch pass, he goes for another touch. In that case, having aggressive strikers that go for intercepting the ball can be really useful, especially when they also have high physical contact, which can really contribute in intercepting the ball from the defenders. A bit of a downside that can come with this skill is of course that aggressively pressuring CBs requires high stamina, and the recent strikers and players Konami releases always have low stamina, and a lot of people tend to use the counter target individual instruction on them, which leads to basically reverting this skill. For that reason, although it's a very useful skill, I'm really being a bit skeptical, because I feel like on a lot of players you will end up not using or not fully benefiting from this skill. Another fact is that there are definitely more important options or more important skills that you could add to a striker, especially because of the recently added or not so recently added individual instructions that make everyone use counter target on their players. I'm gonna put this skill just into the B tier. The striker positions use up a lot of stamina, so it's really hard to actually find a striker that would have good enough stamina to keep pressuring the defense the whole game. And if you decide to actively use this skill, you would have to basically substitute your whole attacking front. Out of the three skills I already mentioned that are must-haves for CBs and defensive-minded players, I believe Interception to be almost the best one. Not only does it improve the interceptions of CB and enhance already great defensive stats, you can also give it, and you should probably give it, to CMFs like box to boxes, and of course the DMFs, because giving them interception really allows you to intercept the ball before even an attack of the opponent begins, and immediately begin an attack of your own. This is another one of those skills that I believe to be more important than stats, because if you give this skill to a player, even if he doesn't have the best defensive stats, you can notice an immediate impact of this skill. He definitely improves in intercepting the ball, and he becomes maybe even good at it. For me, this one is really easy. I believe that Interception should definitely be in S tier, as it's useful on both defensive players, CBs, fullbacks, but even on players from the middle field, for example DMFs or CMFs that are box-to-box players. Let's now take a look at the last of those three skills I named the best defensive skills every CB must have. The blocker is also a really important skill. When compared to the two others, I'd say this one has more uses and it's more diverse. On the one hand, when using this skill on CBs or maybe even defensive fullbacks, you're able to block long shots. Sometimes you see the opponent charging up a stunning shot, but you're not able to get there in time to intercept the ball. Instead, with great positioning, you're able to block this shot and prevent your goalkeeper to be tested. Sometimes your goalkeepers do concede those crazy long shots, so you definitely want to block those shots. Another use is of course blocking the shots already inside the box. Having this skill allows for quick blocks, so your CBs might block by themselves, or of course if you're positioning and holding the pressing button correctly, you'll also be able to block shots almost like a goalkeeper. It has definitely happened to you that a player is using his CBs in a really good way, so he is able to really block and clear the shots off the line, almost acting like a goalkeeper. Another way of using this skill is of course blocking passes, so this aspect can be used in the middle field. You can add this skill to DMFs for them to be able to block and intercept passes before they are received. And of course you're also able to block different types of passes that are coming inside of your box or maybe just outside of it, if you are talking about CBs. For just how versatile this skill is, with blocking both passing and shooting from different positions on the pitch, and it is very effective in all of those. I just have to put it in S tier up with the two other skills, because just think about it. It has multiple uses on multiple positions. It's both useful on CBs, on fullbacks, and on DMFs. It's also amazing. Now let us come back to a combo I told you about way in the beginning of this video, which is heading and aerial superiority. This combo is highly important both in the middle of the defense and attack, as it's both important for CBs and of course for strikers, but of course only if you want to cross to your strikers. As I've said before, I believe aerial superiority to be the more important skill in this combo, as factually it allows for heading to be activated. Because heading, generally speaking, it only affects the accuracy and power of the headers. When I added just header to some players, I really didn't notice them winning more headers, but when they did win headers, they were more accurate and had more power. For that reason, combining heading with aerial superiority is crucial, as aerial superiority allows even for smaller players who don't really have that much jumping to still be able to win more headers. An example of how effective this skill can be is Luis Suarez, who doesn't have the best height, it's just 182, and not the best jumping, just about 76 with my progression. He's still able to score headers once in a while. I definitely don't use crosses and heading as my main game plan, but once in a while, you know, every 2 or 3 matches, he is in fact able to score a header, which really can surprise an opponent, as he oftentimes scores a header against taller opponents, against taller CBs, who are just unable to react fast enough. Adding this skill to defensive fullbacks can also be a great idea, as the opponent does not expect your fullbacks to typically have good aerial strength, and they most likely will be crossing to their wingers or making lofted through balls in order to run on the wings. And here's actually where you come in and surprise them and show them that your fullbacks are also able to win some headers, especially against wingers, which are typically weaker on that part. For just how important this skill is in defense, it's really a no-go to play without it. I really must put it in the S tier. It is also really useful if you're planning to use heading as your game plan, as not only are CBs more likely to score headers from corners with this skill, but also your strikers will do the same thing. Let's take a look at sliding tackle. Unfortunately, sliding tackles by themselves, not even accounting for this skill, are not that great in our game. It is always a high risk to go for a sliding tackle, and if you do it with a player who doesn't have this skill, usually those sliding tackles have very limited range and they do perform them quite slowly. So if you do decide to go for sliding tackles, you should definitely do it with a player who has this skill. The problem is though, there are probably way more effective ways to intercept the ball. A sliding tackle always basically means that a player will be out for a certain amount of time. So basically, if you do decide to go for the challenge, go for the sliding tackle, and you miss, you've basically just lost a player and the opponent is able to just run past you. I'm not too sure when exactly this feature was removed, but back in the day, maybe in PES 2021, I remember there was a feature called the auto tackle or something like that, where you basically could be holding the pressure button and the player would automatically go for a sliding tackle at times, and that was actually pretty good. It was hated a lot in the community and it wasn't as reliable, but it was definitely one of the best uses of sliding tackles. In the present though, in our game today, I don't think there's any reason to ever go for a sliding tackle. You're better off to just intercept the ball or just stay back and block it instead. I'm not sure how exactly those two factors are connected, but when blocking using the blocker skill, some players might go into sliding tackles to block the ball, which can be very effective. So I'm not too sure if having the sliding tackle player skill also plays a role in those blocks. If it does, it is a decent use of this skill, but overall I don't see any reason to use the slide tackle, and for that reason also I do not see any reason to give this skill to a player. For that reason I just have to put sliding tackle in the D tier. It has no business in our game. There's no reason to use it. It's not the most effective way of intercepting the ball, and even then it has higher risks. So at the same time, a simple interception would be less risky and more effective. Here comes Acrobatic Clearance, which I believe is a bit more useful than Acrobatic Finishing. While Acrobatic Finishing for me is just for showing off, it doesn't really have any benefits over normal shots. But in the case of the Acrobatic Clearance, I believe that having Acrobatic Clearance is actually good. You see, clearing in eFootball can actually be important. You should sometimes not just go for passes, because oftentimes the opponent will be able to intercept those passes and you will concede a goal. Instead, it is safe to sometimes just clear. And unfortunately, if the ball is, for example, in the air, the players oftentimes will go for headers when clearing, and those headers are rarely powerful. They don't go that far, and you're not really able to start an attack of those clearances. For that reason, having Acrobatic Clearance on one of your defenders can be useful, as they will be able to perform a way more powerful clearance even if the ball isn't on the ground. I'd say this is the only reason to ever have this skill on a player, for the fact that you're able to clear balls that are in the air without using your head, because using your head to clear doesn't have the same power as clearing with your feet. So for that reason I'm gonna put it in the C tier, but I think you definitely can play without having this skill, the same way as you can play without having any of those skills in the C tier. None of those are a must-have, but if you do have them, you can use them in some sort of way. Moving on to the next one. The impact of this skill is hard to judge. Captaincy is a skill that in-game says it helps with the effects of fatigue, so basically low stamina. Generally speaking, stamina is highly important in this game. Some players might think that the only thing stamina actually influences is the speed and acceleration of a player, how fast he will be running, maybe how active he will be. But it has been proven that with reduced stamina, the player also has reduced stats. For that reason, you need to make sure not to play a lot of players with low stamina. At the end of the day, it's impossible to have all players on max stamina at the end of the game, but you should definitely sub ones with the lowest stamina. And also consider stamina as a factor when building your squad. Coming back to the skill, this is one of those skills we don't really see the stats for. We don't see by how much it actually improves the effects of fatigue. Assuming that it is somewhat a noticeable difference, I would put this skill also in C tier, as even if this skill doesn't reduce the fatigue by a lot, it's still something. Just think about it. If one player has this skill, it reduces the effects of fatigue for the whole team. And that is a huge bonus, even if the impact is not that high. Following that, we have another skill that it is unclear about how big the impact of it exactly is. Super Soap is another skill in which Konami is really unclear in its description. It just says that it improves the abilities, so the stats of a player after he is subbed in after the halftime break. Most people say that it's a buff of +5 to every stat, but I'm not too sure whether it's just a buff for +5, because that does seem a bit too good, and you don't really see that big of a performance upgrade after this skill is activated. I'd argue that this is more complicated than just adding stats to a player. From my experience, I believe it also depends on the player which has this skill, because some players are really perfect for this skill. One great example is of course Filippo Inzaghi. This man is absolutely notorious for his super sub abilities. You play him in the second half and he suddenly comebacks for you, he scores, a hat-trick. Although he doesn't have the best stats on most of his cards, he's still able to somehow win you the game with his aura. Another example that was popular until recent times was Haaland. Of course, in PES 2020, all of his cards had this skill and everyone was playing him in the second half. Nowadays, I believe most of his cards do not have this skill, so this doesn't really apply to him, but he definitely seemed more dangerous back in the day when you sub him in later. Myself, I also play some super sub players, and I do see an upgrade in performance compared to when I played them right from the beginning. And because of how much your players use stamina in this game, you will definitely have to sub at least someone later in the game. So I think you might as well just take the value of this skill and play someone who has this skill. If the impact is not that high, combined with the fact that you're subbing in a fresh new player with full stamina, is also great. And the fact that he also gets some sort of bonus added onto him is just great. So I think I'll put this skill in the B tier because it's a decent addition to a player skill if you plan to sub in a player later in games. Here comes the last skill before we move on to the goalkeeper skills. And I believe for this one a lot of people claim that it is a must for CBs and defenders. What the description claims is that players with this skill are unfazed by surrounding pressure and are less susceptible to the effects of fatigue. A lot of great CBs already start with this skill, which could be a good sign that it is quite good. For example, the Loft Costa Corta, which is one of the best free to play cards in the game, and it is still also used by players with more expensive cards. And he is one that has this skill, and as you could probably see if you've played him, he really barely loses any stamina, which is of course also connected to his high stamina stat. And when comparing him to other players with also high stamina, they seem to be losing more stamina, maybe because they do not have this skill. I've also seen some examples of how fighting spirit can be apparently useful on attacking players, but I'm really unexperienced with this use of this skill. I've seen people give it to players with low physical contact and claim that those players are now better in the aspect of not being pushed away by strong defenders. So guys, I've seen both good examples and bad examples, if you can call it that, because I've had both CBs without this skill that perform really nicely, but I also have a lot of CBs that perform really well and have this skill. I'll have to trust the opinion of a lot of other players here, and I'll put it at least into the B tier, but I've really not noticed that big of a difference when comparing defenders with or without this skill. We are now nearing the end of this tier list, as now I'll check out the goalkeeper skills that are left over. The first one, goalkeeper Low Punt, you should definitely have, as when compared to your goalkeeper clearing or passing normally without having this Low Punt, if your goalkeeper would pick up the ball and you would use a Lofted Pass, the pass would go high and it would be slower. Meaning that if you just pick up the ball after the opponent's attack, you're not really able to counter-attack immediately after. The goalkeeper Low Punt not only allows for those passes to be faster, they also seem to be more easy for the teammates to control. When using a goalkeeper without the skill, I could really notice how it did actually make a huge difference. So I'll actually put this skill in the A tier, as I believe it is highly important to have to be able to counterattack properly. Maybe if counterattacking is not your playstyle and you like to keep it slow, either way, then this skill might be not as important for you, which is why it's only in A tier. When it comes to the High Punt, I've never really used it that much. I don't really see a reason to use it. Usually doing such a long clearance, which goes high, just means that you will end up losing the ball. So I don't think it's a good idea to have this skill on a goalkeeper, or more importantly, go for those long and high passes. When compared to the GK Low Punt, the GK Low Punt actually helps you to keep the ball, keep the possession, while when using goalkeeper High Punt, you're actually risking to lose the ball, especially if you don't have a tall striker which is good at headers. You will definitely lose the ball more often than actually creating a counterattack from a High Punt. For that reason, it's just a C tier for me. I've seen people claim that this skill is also a good skill for goalkeepers that they should have. Maybe if it's just another option you could have in case you see that the positioning of the opponent is not that good. Maybe he's trying to attack you aggressively, and for that reason you pull out this goalkeeper High Punt. It might be a good idea to have some variety in your arsenal. So for that case, I'd say this is a decent skill to have a backup plan. Goalkeeper long throw is another skill I would definitely have on your goalkeepers, and it has the same reasoning as goalkeeper low punt. I believe that goalkeeper long throws also help to create counterattacks very well. You're really able to pick the ball up and throw it right into the middle field before the opponent's midfielders are able to cover up and go back into defense. This one is also really simple for me. I'll just put it in the A tier. For the same reason, it is really good for making counterattacks, but once again, you could decide to play without it. You could just wait and, for example, just pass to one of your closer CBs or players that are just closer to the goalkeeper. You don't have to play in this aggressive counterattack style, which is why you probably could use a goalkeeper without those skills. And for the very last skill, finally, goalkeeper penalty saver, which I have previously mentioned in this tier list. When covering, of course, penalty specialist. You see, the only thing goalkeeper penalty saver actually does is when your opponent shoots into the top bin, usually a goalkeeper without this skill, without the goalkeeper penalty saver skill, would most likely concede a top bin shot. No matter how high his stats are, I believe that it really matters whether you have this skill or not. If your goalkeeper does have this skill, it's pretty unlikely to concede a goal like that. But as I have shown when I talked about the penalty specialist skill, in that clip I'm actually taking a penalty for Messi, who has penalty specialist, and shooting it against Pickford, who also has goalkeeper penalty saver. And he was still able to concede a goal in the top bin, even when he guessed the correct direction of the penalty. So guys, for the same reason, for the exact same reason as I put penalty specialist in the C tier, I'm also putting penalty saver in the C tier. Penalties are absolute garbage in this game. I'm sorry to bring it to you. It's just a game of rock, paper, scissors. Just a pure game of guessing, which takes no skill. You cannot miss the penalty, and when you guess where to jump as a goalkeeper, you also, if you guess correctly, you will save it, with the exception, of course, when your opponent hits the top bin, which is also kind of a stupid mechanic, which isn't even prevented by the goalkeeper penalty saver skill, which is another reason that for me, it's not even that important. If this skill would really guarantee you of saving every shot, Of course, if you guess the direction, then I will definitely add it to all goalkeepers. But as I've showcased to you, it is only a chance. You're still able to score in this way. So if goalkeeper... Let's now look at the whole tier list once again. And as you can see, unfortunately, it got so big that I was unable to fit it on the screen. So what I had to do is, as you can see, on the left you can see S and A tier. Then you go to the right, there's the B tier, the C tier, and at the bottom you can see the D tier. Let's talk about the stuff that sticks out the most. In my opinion, Marseille Turn is better than Double Touch for the fact that it has more uses, it's more versatile, you're able to use Marseille Turn in more ways. More about that in detail when I was ranking Marseille Turn, so you can go back and listen to that. For the same reason, I put and nerfed Double Touch a bit, so I didn't put it quite in S tier, as I believe it really only has a limited use, which is really good, but it also is combined with how much the skill is being overused. So you can also go back and listen to what I said and how I justified this ranking when ranking the Double Touch. What I could also add is, of course, how I exactly define those tiers. So what you can see in D tier is skills I consider not only not good, but also annoying at times. So something that can slow you down, actually make your gameplay worse instead of improving it. C tier for me was something that is nice to have, but you can play the same way without it. One skill that I maybe regret putting in the C tier is of course Captaincy, but in terms of actually having to add Captaincy to a player, I've never really had that problem. For that reason, I didn't rank it that high, as I primarily focused also on what skills you should add to players, and usually you always end up having a player with this skill. More on why exactly Captaincy is important, you can once again hear about when you click on the timestamp Captaincy. In the B tier we can see skills that have some uses, and you definitely improve your gameplay by adding those skills, but I believe that you can still play without them just fine. In A tier you can see skills that are almost a must-have. You should definitely have at least some players with those skills in your lineup. And in S tier you can see skills that you can probably not play without, or when playing without them, you're definitely missing out on potential. I hope you enjoyed this tier list and watched at least some of it, as I've really put in a lot of work when making this tier list, which is also a reason why I unfortunately didn't upload the last 2 weeks. And at the end of the day, remember guys, this tier list is based off subjective opinions of mine, of my own experience. So you might have completely different opinions from me, especially on those skills, like for example aerial superiority, which are not connected to any type of stats. So you are not really able to tell how big the impact of those skills actually is. And that's the reason why personal experience matters the most when ranking those skills.